Alright, so in today's video, we'll be diving into a very important aspect of Python programming, which is file handling and input and output. Whether you're working with data, configuration files, logs, mastering file handling is very essential. So enough of the spiel, let's get started. So let's get an understanding on why file handling is so important. Well, it allows us to interact and create external files, which makes Python very powerful, especially for things like data processing and storage. And you know that Python is always associated to things that handles a lot of data. So usually data is stored in files, so file handling can be a very powerful aspect when it comes to Python. So here's a list of files that Python support. There's CSV, there's XLSX, there's zip, there's plain text, the usual text files. There's JSON, XML, HTML, and more. So today we'll just focus on text files. In another video when I created my Python web scripting video, we already messed around with CSV files. So if you want to see that, I'll leave a link somewhere for that. But in today's video, we'll interact with creating and interacting with text files. So common file operations in Python when it comes to file handling is the usual read, write, and append. And in this video, I'll provide examples for each one of these operations. Now, the difference between write and append, and they both add to a file, but the difference between write and append is that write overwrites data in a file, while append, as the name implies, append the data to the end if there's already data within the file. So when we go and use these operations, that's really the main difference between write and append. They still create data, they still add data to a file, but if you want to add on to a file, append will be utilized, where if you want to overwrite data in a file, then write will be utilized. And read is just to read data from files. Whether that's one row, 5 rows, or all the rows, we'll use read to get information and see what's inside of a file if the file is available. So now that we got an understanding of the files that Python can interact with and the operations for file handling, let's actually utilize these operations with some Python code. So let's move over to our editor. Alright, so now we're in Visual Studio, and I already created app.py, but you can create a Python file with whatever name that you want. I just chose app, and I have a text file called demo.txt, and like I said, we'll be utilizing text files in this tutorial. So right now I just have this txt file, and it just has one line, and it just says inside of demo file. Right, very descriptive. So we're going to start off with the read operation first. And to read from demo.txt, what we'll need to do is we'll need to open a file, read the content, and we can do whatever we want with the content inside of it. But what I want to do is I just want to print it out. So let's get started with that. Now, Python makes it really easy to read the content of files. And I think that's the reason why Python is often used when it comes to handling and processing data. And it has various methods that we can utilize to actually read data from files. So there's read line, and there's read lines with an S. It's plural. So it makes a lot of sense exactly what it does. It's read line, which is singular, and then there's read lines if you want all the lines. But the special thing about read lines is that it returns as a list, and we'll see that. Now, like I said, the first thing that we got to do is actually open the file. So Python has a built-in function called open, which we can utilize to open the file. And what it's going to do in the end is, after we specify the file that we want to open and the mode that we're going to specify, which in this case we're going to read the file, so we're going to specify R as the mode for read, then it's going to return a file object. So let's start. Right, so I want to create a variable called f, and then I'm going to make that equal to the built-in function, so open, and I want to specify the file that we're trying to open, so it's going to be demo.txt in this case. Now the reason why it's just demo.txt is because demo.txt is in the same directory as is app.py. But say for instance you're trying to open a file that's somewhere else and it's not in the same directory, then you'll have to get the whole path to open it. But in this case, since it's in the same directory, I just got to specify demo.txt, which is just a name. But just keep in mind, like I said, if it's in like your downloads folder or if it's somewhere else, you got to specify the path, the full path. So cool. And then the next thing we got to specify is the mode. Like what are we trying to do with this file that we're trying to open? Well, in this case, I want to read. So to specify that we're trying to read is just the R mode, which is read. And like I said, this is going to return a file object, and this is going to allow us to utilize some of the built-in methods that we can interact with this file object that's being returned and do what we need to do, which in this case, we're trying to read from the file. So what we're going to do is read from that file object being returned. So I'm going to print out the content. So to do that, I'm going to do F, which is holding instance of the file object that's being returned from this, and it's in the read mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize a method called read. And let me go back. If you use the dots, you can see that there's a lot of methods, right? So, but the one that I want is right here, which is read. And we can see read lines. We can see there should be a read line somewhere, but there are various methods that we can use. So let's do read. There's read line right here. But we're going to do read, and what that should do is that it should read all of the content within the file. So let's do Python 3, and I'm going to do app.py, and boom, inside of demo file. Cool. It grabbed literally the only line within the text file right here. So we know that it works, but let's add another line, right? Another one, and another one, dot dot dot. Save that. Now we got 3 lines. All right, so let's run that again. Boom. Inside of demo file, another one and another one. Perfect. It's working as expected. And like I said, there is also read line, which, as the name implies, read a line. And since it's singular, it's one line, I should expect that it should just return one line, which it does, inside of demo file. Perfect. And then there's read lines, which, it's plural, right? But it's a little bit special, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to read all the lines, but it's going to put it in a list format. So if you need each line and you want to be able to use indexes to retrieve each line, so we know that if we use 0, we'll get the first line. If we use 1, we'll get the second line, etc., etc. Then you can use read lines to get the information, but put it in the list format. So those are the 3 methods that are commonly used to read files in Python. Now, what if we only want to get part of the file, right? Well, we could do that, right? We could do read, and what if we only want like the first 8 characters? Well, with read, we could pass in a number, and with that, it should grab the first 8 characters. So if I run this again, Python 3 app.py, we can see that it's inside, and space is considered a character, so inside O, and it's done. So if you just want a series of characters, then you can also utilize the read method, but then as a parameter pass in the amount of characters that you want to read. That works as well. Or another thing that you can do is if you want to individually access each row without read lines, like the plural version of it, you can also utilize read line. Remember that this right here is returning a file object. So what we could do is we can take this file object and iterate through each line and print it out. So what we can do is use a for loop. So for line in this file object, then we can print out line. And let me comment this out. And let me run this. Boom. Inside of demo file, another one and another one. And you can see that there's some spacing issues. We could do strip to remove that. And it removes the spacing. So yeah, if you want to iterate through it and get a file one by one, you can also do that as well. Perfect. Now, with opening a file, just like with a door, when you open a door, it's proper to close it. So when we open a file in Python, you have to close it, or you should close it. It's essential to close it, because if you don't, it can slow down your program. If you have too many things open, say for instance, this is not the only thing that you're interacting with or only file that you're interacting with, it can slow down your program. It can use too much space, too much RAM, and it could impact performance. And for many instances, many changes to a file doesn't occur until after the file is closed. So if you were to make any edits in the future and you leave a file open and read a file, you probably won't be able to see the edits until the file is properly closed. And like I said, if you're dealing with a lot of files and you're opening a lot of files and you're not closing them, there is a limit, and that, like I said, could affect the performance of your application and could cause it to crash. So be careful with that. And to close it, well, Python. Python likes to make it very simple with a naming convention. So all you got to do is take the variable that's holding the instance and just do dot close, and that should handle that for us. So always make sure that if you open a file that you close it. Let me put a comment here. This is for read, and comment this out. And now, I'll bring this towards the bottom. Let's do writing. Now we can write to either create new files or overwrite and append onto existing files. So there are different modes for different use cases. We have X, and let me put this in the comment. We have X, which is to create a file, and if the file already exists, then it's gonna return an error. So returns an error if it already exists. Another mode that we have is append, which we talked about, which it will create a file if it doesn't exist, or open one if it does already exist. And what this will do is it'll just, as the name implies, append data, right? It's still going to write the data, but it's going to append on to it. And then we have W, which is just, and this is A, which is append, and W, which is write. It will create a file if the file is not specified or if it doesn't exist. And if it does exist and there's data inside of it, then it will overwrite the data. So these are the three modes for writing. There's X for creating a file that doesn't exist. If it does exist already, then it's going to return an error. There's append, which, as the name implies, is going to append data. And if it doesn't exist, then it's going to just create a new file. But if it already exists, then it's just going to open up the file that already exists and append the information to it. And then there's write, which will also do the same of if a file is already created, then it will overwrite the data. But if it doesn't exist yet, then it's going to create the file and it's going to write the new data to it. So let's utilize this. Let's do the same thing. We're going to need to open a file, and I'm going to do demo 2.txt, and I am going to utilize X, right? And I want to do f.write, and I want to do I created a new file. And like I said, it's good convention to close what you open. So go ahead and close that, and let's clear this out and let's run it. So Python 3, and because this app.py is in this directory, I should expect the new file to be created in the same directory. So Python 3, and I didn't specify a specific directory. I specified the the same directory that app.py is in. So let's do app.py, and boom, we see that it pops up demo2.txt, and I created a new file. So it works as expected, but let's see what happens if, while in X mode, which I remember that I put right here, X, create a file, but it returns an error if it already exists. What happens if I run the same script again? Well, it does not like that because the file already exists. It's going to throw an error. So this is perfect if you want to create a file for the first time, but if you know that there's a chance that the file might already exist, then you probably shouldn't use this. So let's utilize, and let me comment this out just in case you want to have that as a note. Let me put this here on top. I'm just going to copy and paste the same thing, but what I want to do is I want to utilize A. And A stands for append, right? So append, if it doesn't exist, then it'll create one, or open one if it does already exist. So we know that demo2 already exists, so it's going to open demo2 no problem, and then we can append on data to it. So appended data is what I expect, right? And let's run this. Boom, no errors, and it closed right after. And if I go back to demo 2, we can see that it appended the data, granted in the same line, but the data is appended. I'm pretty sure if I put a /n or \n, it should put on a new line. So if I do this, run it again, it adds it to a new line, right? So yeah, and if you don't want that space that was initially there, because if I go back, I see that there's a little space here. So if I save that, make sure that it's touching, right? And I run it again, then we can see that there is no space. It's appended properly. Perfect. So that's append. But there's a nasty one, and I'll comment this one out. And I'll bring this to the bottom. There is the last one, which is the write mode, or the W mode. When the write will create it if it doesn't exist, and if it does exist, then it will overwrite the data. So let's do that. Let's put W here. I overwrite the data, right? So what this should do is, if demo2.txt exists and we're using the W mode and we write to that file that already exists, then it will overwrite it. So if we open this, we can see that it has all this data. But if I run this and I go back, everything was overwritten. It's gone, right? It has what we want to write, or what we did write, but everything else is gone. So if you know that is data that you don't mind to be overwritten if it already exists, then you can go ahead and use the W mode. But if you want to add on to data, then use append, right? If you want to add to the end, use append, because the nature of write is that the pointer starts at the beginning, so that, you know, anything previously would just be erased. But with append, the pointer is towards the end, so it just append on the information towards the end, no problem. So different use cases for each mode. Just think about it whenever you're dealing with files, right? Cool. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions regarding writing, you can leave it down in the comment section. All right, so one issue that we got to think about when dealing with file handling is the fact that errors do occur, and we want to make sure that when errors do occur that we're handling that properly. Because like I said, when we do open a file, we want to make sure that it closes, because we don't want to be using resources unintentionally. Like, we want to make sure that when we open something, we close it, and the resources are being utilized the way that we expect it to. So I brought up the X mode so that we can test, or that we can show how to handle when an error does occur. So we know about error handling, right? There's try and there's accept, but in this case, I want to do try and finally. So I want to try to write to this, right? And we know that in X mode, if it tries to write to a file that already exists, then it's going to break. It's going to scream at us. But we want to make sure that no matter what occurs, we want to close the file. So what we're going to do is finally, and no matter if there's an error towards the end, it's going to close it. So yes, it's going to scream at us. So we're going to do Python 3, and we're going to do app.py. And yes, it's going to scream at us, but at least we know that it was closed at the end, right? And you could also do a wrap it around a try except to handle it in a more cleaner manner. But I just want to show you guys how you can handle closing a file when there are exceptions when attempting to write. So yeah, that's how you do that. Use finally and close it towards the end. Now you're probably wondering to yourself, like, man, I have to remember to do that every time. Like every single time I open a file, I got to remember to open and then close the file. What if I forget? Like, what if I'm in a rush, right? That happens. Hopefully you're not in a rush while programming. That'd be bad. You got to think and make proper solutions. But it does get annoying to always have to remember to close the file. So Python did make a workaround, and they have a keyword called with, right? You can use with to automatically close the file. So this ensures that no matter what, the file's properly closed. So even if an error occurs, it will close. Python already handles that for us. So this is considered the best practice, the best thing to do to make sure that no matter what, your file closes. So let's see it in action. So like I said, the keyword is with. So with open, we can do demo.txt, and what I want to do is I want to just read it, right? And I want to give it a name, because just like how below we had a variable holding the value or the file object as f, and we were able to do f.write and f.close, we still need a name so that we can interact with the file. So we'll just use as and specify a name that we want to give it. So I'm still going to use f, so as f. So I'm going to open this file object with, and what this is going to do is automatically close the file when we're not using it, and this is all going to be stored as f. And now we can just do what we did before, which is, we could print out f.read, and let's run it. So let me clear this out and do Python 3 app.py, and boom, inside of demo file, another one and another one, just as before. But now we don't have to worry about closing it. With this with keyword, it does it for us. So even if there's an issue, if there's an error, it's still going to close it for us. It saves us a lot of time, and we don't even have to think about it anymore. All I got to do is add the keyword of with, and then make sure you give it a name so that you can reference it as a variable, so you can do read, write, whatever you need to. So you just use the as keyword and specify the name that you want to give it as. Perfect. Now, one operation that I forgot to talk about, and let me comment this out and bring it down. I forgot to talk about delete. So I talked about read, I talked about write. Technically, write does delete things sometimes. It overwrites stuff. But there's actually delete. We could delete files if we want to, right? So to do that, we'll need to import OS, right? Because it's a lot of power. So we're going to have to import OS. And what we're going to need to do is do os.remove, right? And we can specify what we want to remove. So demo 2 is kind of useless now because the data is kind of overwritten. So I want to remove that. So I'm going to specify the path of where the file is. And like I said many times, app.py is in the same directory as these text files that I'm interacting with. So I don't have to specify a long path. I can just specify the exact name. So I want to delete or remove demo2.txt, and yeah, it should remove it. But I don't want to teach you guys bad convention. I want to teach you guys the proper convention, because what if there's a case where demo2 doesn't exist? That would be an issue. That would definitely throw an error. So to make sure that it exists and that we're removing a proper file, we can do a check. So we want to check if os.path.exist. We can specify the path. So we're trying to delete demo2.txt. right? So as the name implies, if it exists, it's going to return a boolean because we're using an if. So if it exists, then we can do this. We can remove it, right? Else, let's just let them know that it doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Perfect. So let's clear this out. Python 3 app.py. Boom. Demo 2 is gone. Right? It was removed. And if I run it again, it's going to say it doesn't exist. The file doesn't exist. And if I didn't have this check before, it would probably cause some problems. Actually, let's see that. You know, sometimes I like problems. So let's see what would happen if I didn't have the check. Well, it will just say that it doesn't. Oh, actually, I forgot the indent. That's more on me. Let's run that again, and we can see that no such file is gonna get mad. So that's one way that we can check that if it exists. It'll be a little bit of some handling, so that we make sure that the file exists before we remove it, and it's just cleaner to do that. So there are a lot of use cases when it comes to file handling, right? Like I said, Python is a leader when it comes to handling data. I already have another video on my channel in regards to web scraping where I take data from a website after I finish scraping the information, and I write the data to a CSV file. So there are plenty of use cases when it comes to writing, reading, deleting, updating. So now that you know how to do that, now you just got to take those skills and utilize it to the use case that you want to use it for. So like I said, it's whether it's data processing, whether it's managing logs as they come through your system, whether it's handling data that's being scraped. Go check out that video if you want to. I'll leave a link somewhere on the screen. But file handling is very important, especially in Python. It just makes Python even more powerful than it already is. So hopefully you found that useful, and hopefully you found that concise and understandable, and now you know where you want to use it. I am curious to see or hear on how you guys plan on using that. So leave that down in the comment section below, and hope you guys like that video, and hopefully you want to see more videos like that. And if you do, go ahead and subscribe, leave a like, and yeah, stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.